Hey there, Fourth Trimester listeners. Our program today is proudly sponsored by Family Album, your secure haven for sharing baby photos and videos. Head over to the App Store today, search Family Album, one word, download the app, and start creating a legacy of love, one photo at a time. Hi, I'm Sarah Trott, and welcome to the Fourth Trimester Podcast. I'm a new mama, and this podcast is all about postpartum care for the first few months following birth, the time period also known as the fourth trimester. My postpartum doula, Esther Gallagher, is my co-host. She's a mother, grandmother, perinatal educator, birth and postpartum care provider. Fourth trimester care, our topic, is about the practical, emotional, and social support parents and baby require. And importantly, it helps set the tone for the continuing journey of parenting.
Hello again, listeners. It's Esther Gallagher here today with Leah Chalofsky, an MFT. I'll introduce Leah in a moment. I'm very happy to have her on the show. But I wanted to do our usual reminder that not only can you tell all your friends and family and people you don't even know about our podcast, fourthtrimester.podcast.com. But we also have our Facebook page, and we have a subscriber page and support page called at Patreon. If you can go there and can afford to give us a little bit of support, we would so appreciate it. So today we're so happy to have Leah with us. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist who has a private practice in the Excelsior neighborhood of San Francisco and has been providing therapy since 2007. She worked as a nanny, theater workshop facilitator, and health educator prior to that. And prior to private practice, she worked at two nonprofits that provided outpatient mental health services and court-ordered groups. She's been in private practice at the Holistic Wellness Center that we so love, Community Well, for almost 3 years, and specializes in working with maternal mental health, domestic violence, and anxiety. And as you listeners know, we talk about all of those things on this show quite a bit. And I'm so happy to be able to chat with Leah about all those subjects. So, Leah, tell us kind of your story. What brought you here? What's up?
Well, thank you for having me, Esther. It's really nice to be here. I sort of always knew I wanted to be a therapist for a really long time, but it took me a while to get to the place where I was ready to do that as my career. I did work as a nanny and a theater workshop facilitator, doing workshops in the community. And when I was a health educator, I was teaching sex education in middle schools and high schools.
Ooh, we're going to want to talk about that a little more.
That was really interesting, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I also worked with teen parents during that time. And that helped me get to the place where I was really ready to go to grad school and was ready to become a therapist, because I was working with these teen parents and realized that I wanted to be working with them in a different capacity, that I really wanted to be more as a support and really be able to talk to people about what they were going through and help them through their struggles. So I went to graduate school and worked in a few different nonprofits doing my internship hours, worked with a really wide variety of clients, and did a lot of group work, which felt really natural for me and which I really enjoyed, coming from doing theater workshops and teaching health ed. I had always been working with groups. So doing the court-ordered groups, did groups for people who had gotten DUIs or people who had been convicted of domestic violence and were court-ordered to do some group work. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the groups and learned so much through those experiences. about the time that I got my license, I had my second kid and was trying to figure out what was next for me, and thought that private practice was probably the way I was going to go, since I'm a mom and having 2 kids felt like private practice would be the most flexible and the easiest for me to do. And
is that true? Now that you're doing it.
I think so, because I can make my own schedule and I can work during the hours when my kids are at school or really make it work for my family. And luckily, magically, I met Ali Quintos, who was starting Community Well around that time, one of the founders. And she said, I'm starting this wellness center and we'd love to have some therapists have their practice there. Is that something you'd be interested in? And I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. Yes. So when my youngest was around 9 months, I started at Community Well just 1 or 2 days a week, seeing clients. And it was such a perfect fit, not only because it's in the neighborhood and the people running it are just wonderful and amazing. And it really fit with me as a mom, being able to work with a lot of moms and parents there. So being at Community Well, we have, Community Well has a lot of services for people who are pregnant, people who are parenting, and so it makes sense for me and my practice to move in that direction. And I've gotten a lot of referrals from other people at Community Well, and so have since done a lot of trainings and gotten some experience. And so now my practice really does focus a lot on working with parents and people who are pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant and what that all means for them. So I work with individuals a lot, and then I also do some groups here and there, partially because people at Community Well have come to me and said, this is something that we think is needed. And we are wondering if you would be interested in leading some groups.
And what are the sorts of focuses for those groups, if there are focuses?
Yeah, so I help facilitate a new parent circle, which meets twice a month. And Ali and another doula, Shannon Padlog, they facilitate one of the sessions per month, and then I facilitate the other session. And that's a chance for anyone who has a new baby to be able to come and connect with other parents. And it's really open. It doesn't have a specific focus except
to show up.
Yeah, to show up, parents of new babies. And
is there an upper age limit for those babies?
Up to walking.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. So there are some who are crawling, and there are some teeny little newborns, sort of whoever can make it out. And it's a chance just to connect with other parents and to be able to ask questions and talk about concerns and also connect and form some community.
Yeah.
So that's the one group that I'm facilitating right now. The other group that I have done at Community Well is a Cesarean birth support group.
Oh, talk about that. Sounds great.
Yeah. So that was something that I did after Ali approached me and said that she had worked with a bunch of parents who had been through C-sections and were not planning on C-sections. And so the experience was traumatic for them. And they weren't expecting some of the emotions that they were having afterwards about the experience. And so I put it out there and have done a few sessions now where a group of women have come in and talked about their experiences and been able to connect with each other about what that was like and really process through what the birth meant for them and what the fallout has been or what the impact has been on them lasting afterwards.
Yeah. I think this is a guess and you can correct me. I think being able to say out loud in a group that might have a similar experience to yours, with its own personal details, all of those things that you mentioned, when so much of it is so mysterious in a way, and so not what you were envisioning and imagining, and so not what your partner expected if you have a partner. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just being able to talk about it with someone with people who have some form of perspective on it. And, doulas are great. And then we have our own limited experience as well. Mm-hmm. So reaching out into that community, that's the community of moms having who had C-section, is huge, I think.
Yeah, I think it can be really powerful for people to be able to voice their experiences and be able to tell their story without people saying things like, oh, well, at least you have a healthy baby, because that isn't always people mean well, but it isn't always very helpful as far as how people experience the birth. Mm-hmm. And so being able to sit in a room with other people who have experienced something similar, being able to relate to other people and hear that you're not alone mm-hmm. in some of the thoughts and feelings that you're having.
Mm-hmm. Which could really span the gamut, right? Yeah. Anger, frustration, love, happiness, it really does. In my experience, secondhand as a doula mm-hmm. who does postpartum care and is somebody who clients can talk about and doesn't say the thing that I don't want people to say. Yeah. They're, really naturally, of course, because birth is so wide open. Mm-hmm. It really does run quite a gamut, and to feel safe saying, I'm really angry about something that happened.
Yes.
Yes. Big.
Yeah. And I think there can be shame that women feel sometimes when they don't feel extreme joy after giving birth. And when they have mixed feelings, mixed emotions about the birth experience or about the postpartum time, mm-hmm. that they really can feel shame about it. And mm-hmm. so being in a safe place where they can voice those things and know they're not going to be judged for them mm-hmm. and know that there are probably other people in the room feeling the same thing, mm-hmm. that can be really healing.
Yeah. And, let's circle around to that statement, right? That statement of, well, at least you have a healthy baby. Mm-hmm. The person saying it may be very unconscious, but the fact is, I think that many of us would receive that statement as a shaming statement, right? Like, why aren't you just feeling one thing, which is, thank goodness I have this happy baby, this healthy baby, rather than, gosh, how are you feeling about all this? It was a big event.
Yeah. And that it's okay to feel a wide variety of emotions. It's mm-hmm. okay to feel gratitude that, yes, I have this healthy baby and we're both okay, and to feel anger or to feel disappointment or sadness about the birth itself, and that it wasn't the experience that you were hoping it would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would even say not just or, but and.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will also add that surprisingly many women who've had quote unquote perfectly great natural childbirths are going to feel quite a span of different feelings and have quite a span of different thoughts too. And so, of course, if you've had a very unexpected or unwished for outcome, that's going to be augmented. So yeah, it's wonderful to have a place to go that's normalizing of all this.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I think also I try to offer some tools for people to be able to manage those emotions and to cope with those emotions. So we do some mindfulness practice about
my favorite,
being able to accept your feelings and know that your feelings are okay and to be able to sort of ride through them. We also do some artwork as a way to process emotions in a different way that's not verbal, do some relaxation practices, a few different things during the course of the group experience so that people feel like they have some tools when they leave, and that they feel like maybe they've gotten to a slightly different place with the birth, that they feel a little bit more resolved about it, or feel like they've been able to be heard and processed it and able to move on in a different way.
Yeah. Maybe with just a little less frustration.
Yeah.
If only, right? Like that would be great. A great thing. Leah, would you talk a little bit more about working with your clients around anxiety? I know, of course, we wouldn't talk about specific clients or, specific presenting things, but anxiety is a thing that we're finally, I think, maybe, hopefully, maybe some of us acknowledging is, I would say, almost a common feature of parenting,
Yes.
if not just life. And it's a powerful, often unconscious force in our lives. And so it's often the case, certainly in my work, that I'm working with people both prenatally and through the birth and through the early weeks of postpartum with this manifestation of kind of the emotional body that shows up in unbidden and in mysterious ways at times. So would you like to talk a little bit about working with anxiety?
Sure.
Thank you.
I have worked with people who have felt some anxiety in preparing for birth, and anxiety about what birth is going to be like. I have worked with people who have given birth and are having anxiety about being parents and what that transition in identity means for them. What does it mean now that I'm a parent? And
Yikes.
I have this little being that I'm responsible for. I think also having a baby, especially if it's your first, brings up a lot in terms of how you relate to your family of origin and things that you've went through in your family. And that can bring up anxiety about, am I going to repeat patterns? Am I going to harm my child? There's so many anxieties as a parent. And I think that, there's that saying that when you have a kid, you wear your heart on the outside of your body. And I think that is really true in some ways, that you are vulnerable in a way that you weren't before, because you have this being that you love so much and that you want to take care of. And there are so many things that come into play that you can't control. So I think anxiety is really common in prenatal, postpartum, that whole time period, and continuing on as your kids get older.
Yes.
So, yes, anxiety.
Let's say 40 and 34 now. Yeah, no, a lot of the anxiety has quelled. Took a while, though.
But anxiety is so common. And I also just want to say that a lot of times people think of postpartum depression, and that is the word that they use to describe the mood changes that happen after birth. But there's a lot of postpartum anxiety as well. And so I think that that's important to name.
Yeah. Years ago, this is so helpful to me. Years ago, when I was struggling with my social emotional health and seeing a therapist, an MFT, I kind of prodded her one day to give me a diagnosis, it was one of those days where I just thought, okay, I've had it. I need Prozac, I just have to figure out that. Right. And, so I prodded her and she smiled, which was so good for me, to have somebody in a moment like that give me a little smile and say, well, if I had to give you a phrase for what you're experiencing, I think I describe it as anxiety-driven depression. And I thought, oh, Like, that's why I feel so activated all the time and so collapsed simultaneously. Like, that's a description I can get my teeth into and realize that what is being called depression, it's confusing to me because I'm not lying on the couch unable to get up, but I'm really out of sorts and really feeling collapsed. And that was so helpful. And therefore I didn't need the Prozac. In that moment, I was like, okay, now I have something I can kind of look into the world for help with in a different way. And I have no judgments about taking mental health drugs. Like, go for it if that's going to really be what helps you. But I just felt like it was such a good marker to then explore life, with another term that could really help me. So thank you for saying, the thing that gets called postpartum depression has many manifestations.
Yes. And that anxiety and depression do often go hand in hand, that oftentimes people feel anxious and then they feel depressed that they're feeling anxious, or they feel depressed and they feel anxious that they're feeling depressed. And so they often go together.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes to separate them.
Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of things that can be helpful for clients with anxiety. And so some of the things that I use, I do teach a lot of mindfulness because I think that can be so helpful in knowing that what you're experiencing is okay, that it's not going to kill you and it's not going to harm you in the long term, that it's really uncomfortable and it really sucks to feel it.
Yes.
But that if we take away sort of the second level of panic and anxiety about the anxiety, that the base level of anxiety feels a little bit more manageable.
Yes. Beautifully described and so true in my own personal experience that this was the moment in my life where I realized I need tools of another nature. I need to do more than just talk about it all the time. And there was a mindfulness-based stress reduction course being offered specifically for midwives, doulas, and OB nurses. So I took advantage of that and changed my life. I mean, it really did.
Yeah.
At a time when, my lovely teenage boy was a source of deep concern. He was actually much better than me. I just didn't realize it because I was running the anxiety about what his life must be like.
Yes.
For instance, not to mention another whole big pile of other life elements. It really was phenomenally helpful to me.
Yes.
Really. It's like a life marker for me. The way people mark getting married or having a baby, that for me, it was also, kind of gave me my life back.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just thrilled that you have that to offer. I think it's just priceless, really.
Thank you. And there are other things too, because some people don't find that mindfulness works for them.
Sure.
And some people don't relate well to that. And so then, there are other tools like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're really looking at the thoughts that you're having and sort of examining them and analyzing them and saying, should I believe this thought? Maybe I shouldn't believe this thought. And how can I replace that thought with a different thought that's more helpful? And that's more beneficial for some people. They find that works better for them. Or some combination of the two.
I think I probably somehow learned to work a little of that in, like give myself a moment, right? The mindfulness could just bring me back to the present. And then when I wasn't, on the ceiling anymore, I could say, is it true? That thing that just drove me up to the ceiling, like, is that really what's happening? Right. And what is happening? And is that something I can be with and work with? Yeah.
I think it's also important to mention that anxiety, a lot of people think of anxiety as thoughts, worries, fears, but there's a lot of types of anxiety that feel like they live in the body. And I think especially for women who are going through intense hormonal changes, that women really feel anxiety in the body a lot. And so that could be, anywhere from stomach upset to shaking or sweating or hot flashes. And that sometimes people feel like there must be something physically wrong with me.
Right. I deal with that every week with my postpartum clients.
Yes.
So my job, of course, is to again and again normalize for them that this is part of the process of healing and recovery. It's okay. Here's some things you can do to ride it, but try not to imagine that there's anything wrong.
Yeah. And it's a good idea to get checked out by a doctor because there are certain medical conditions that can mimic anxiety, such as thyroid issues. So it is really important to get checked out by a doctor if someone is experiencing those symptoms ongoing. But once the medical issues have been ruled out, then it's important to recognize it as anxiety and recognize it for what it is.
Yeah. It's so great, that I think we know so much more about how these things play out physiologically. When I say we, I may be being a little broad. I do think every new mom is sort of reinventing the wheel. There's so much that our culture doesn't share about the normalcy of the postpartum physiological recovery. It's not broadly just talked about before we ever get pregnant. So when the time comes, it kind of pounces on us that the intensity of the physiological recovery. And, we have things that women hear that, well, if you just have a natural childbirth, everything goes great.
Right.
Not true, friends. Not always true. That postpartum recovery is an intensive transition. And so all the more, possibility for anxiety arising if you just thought, well, I squirt the baby out. That's the hard part. And then, put them up to my breast gently and lovingly. And it's all really peaceful after that. There's so much more to that transition.
And that is another reason why I think it's so helpful for parents to be with other parents in some capacity during that postpartum time, because then you can talk about some of those things and know that, I'm not alone and this is a normal thing to be experiencing. Or to realize, wait, this isn't so normal and this is something I need more help with.
Yeah.
Because this is not something that all the other parents are experiencing. But being able to connect with parents and figure that out can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I think also, a lot of times we think of the postpartum period and your podcast about the fourth trimester, focuses on that sort of initial few months, but those hormonal changes and those life changes go on for a really long time.
Very
and
long
so
time.
Sometimes people find that they're totally fine until they stop breastfeeding. And then they have a lot of hormonal changes and end up with some depression or anxiety. Or they're totally fine for a few years. And then once their hormones start changing in some other way, then they experience some difficulties. So it's all connected.
Yes. And it reminds me that, our hormones are fundamental and they shift and change with things like, our youngest going off to preschool or us going back to work and not seeing them for hours of the day.
Right.
That induces hormonal change. Not, anxiety being, a manifestation of like, oh my gosh, I don't get to see that little person that I'm used to seeing X hours of the day and kind of always knowing and having them able to check in with me. That's one level of social emotional stuff. But there is actually even also a hormonal change that happens when that little person isn't touching your body 17 times a day, you know? So these things, you know, they're big. They're a big thing, and we don't tend to relate to them in an abiding way. We tend, at least the culture I grew up in, was dismissive of women's changes by way of saying it's just hormonal. It's kind of like the phrase, well, at least you have a healthy baby, right? Like there's nothing really going on here. You're just kind of a nut. And that's not reality. Yeah. That actually is not reality. There are big changes happening, and they affect us molecularly, cellularly. So,
and it's not the full.
And don't dismiss that. You might need help and resource for that.
Yes.
Hey, fellow parents, can we take a moment to reflect on the joyous chaos that is parenthood? You know those days when our hearts swell with love at the sight of our little ones and we're bursting at the seams to share every adorable moment with the world. But let's be real. Some things are better kept in the family, and your loved ones who matter the most aren't always close by, and they might not be that tech-savvy either. So how can you easily share your baby's beautiful growth with loved ones while keeping your precious memories secure? I remember the frustration of trying to use some of the big tech photo solutions, only to find they fell short of what I needed. That's when I stumbled upon something truly remarkable, the Family Album app. The Family Album app was created to give parents a secure and easy way to share photos and videos with loved ones. It's an orderly and totally secure haven for your family's personal memories. I love that there's no third-party ads, no unwanted eyes, unlimited storage, and that it's totally free. So to all the parents who are out there still trying to use other messaging apps for your kids' photos, it's time to level up your family photo game with a free photo sharing app. Head over to the App Store today, search Family Album, one word, download the app, and start creating a legacy of love one photo at a time.
Yeah. And that hormones are not the full picture. They are a big piece of the puzzle. And there's so many other pieces that are going on in terms of sleep deprivation and identity changes and relationship issues and not having any free time for yourself. There's so many things that are happening during, you know, especially the first year or the first 2 years of your child's life, and so many changes that it's not just the hormones. And that is a big role, but there are.
And it's not just the sleep deprivation, and it's not just, right? I mean, I love that you name all those things together, and no doubt we haven't mentioned a couple of them, you know, that we just didn't happen to remember, but that these things are all interconnected, integrated into the experience we're having as we go along. Yes. And if any one element or combination of elements is really out of whack, you know, hate that phrase. Don't mean to use it very heavy-handedly, but, you know, having the resource of others to support, give tips here and there can really help you just tune something up a little here or there, which affects, you know, has a cascading effect. You know, I think a lot of times parents will name one thing, right? Well, if we could just get this baby to sleep,
right?
You know,
everything will be better.
And will be okay when that happens, rather than maybe understanding like a baby has their own developmental physiological ways in which they do sleeping and finding our way into a negotiated settlement around that might be healthier than just imagining the baby has to change, right? Because now it's everybody together.
Yeah.
So,
and I think a lot of people talk about this too, that in times past, right, we would be raising kids in groups of people, in villages, or surrounded by family. And a lot of people don't.
Or a lot of servants.
Right.
I mean, let's remember that, you know, the wealthy have always just hired it in, you know?
And so here and now, we don't have that support. We don't have a lot of people are living on their own without their families around, or don't have a lot of friends who have kids and have babies.
Yeah.
And so
it's very common in urban areas that people have just arrived mid-pregnancy.
Right.
Into, their geographical area, which hasn't yet become their neighborhood and their community. Mm-hmm. And that's a big transition to be making.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that going to new parent circles, going to yoga classes, going to groups, going anywhere that you can go to connect with other parents is going to be really helpful, because at least then you won't feel so alone and so isolated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And those are great places, because it's very likely you'll make friends.
Yeah.
Everybody's there sort of for the same reasons and can relate.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always feel really happy when I'm facilitating the new parent circle, and at the end, some of the parents say, "Oh, let's go get lunch together." And that's always really nice to see.
Yeah. I was just thinking about how, if you find yourself at a yoga class or a new parents group or a pregnancy group, the other nice thing about living in San Francisco is you can walk a block and you'll be at a cafe. So it can be kind of an immediate thing, right? Yeah. Like you can literally say hi to somebody and go sit down and make a friend somewhere nearby. It's not, having grown up rurally, I have a deep concern for new parents in rural areas, because very little of this exists. It could exist. There are ways. And I imagined ways when I was a young mother in my community, and I reached out. And, almost always you can find somebody. But the nice thing about urban areas is you probably can find it. If you look around, it's probably already in existence.
Yes.
So
that's one of the reasons why I've been so happy working at Community Well, is I think that is one of the main ideas behind it.
Yeah, the whole purpose.
Yeah, let's create community for people around this time of life and around other times of life as well, because Community Well doesn't just serve people who are parents and pregnant. And it really has this model of, maybe you can come see me for therapy, and you can go to a new parent circle, and you can go to a nutrition class, and you can do physical therapy, and you can do it all in this one space. And so people really are building community by seeing people in multiple places within Community Well.
Yeah.
And finding that they feel like they have somewhere they can go, that they feel comfortable.
I love it. It reminds me of when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, and beyond that, my mom, after graduating college with 4 kids, she got her degree in what at that time at Chico State was called social welfare and corrections.
Interesting.
Yes, but she was more interested in the social welfare aspects, of course. And she became executive director of Head Start for 4 rural counties. And because of my age and stage, we'd hang out together. A lot of times after school, I would just go hang out at her office before going home with her and things like that. But the Head Start model was much like what you're describing, very deeply involved in parent participation and offering parents lots of various kinds of courses, little classes where they could learn. Like you said, you talked about nutrition and you talked about child development. I mean, that's what Head Start's about, is child development. And so parents got to learn and do along with the other various staff people and many of those parents would go on to become staff because they would get their educations. They were encouraged to be resourceful, and Head Start would help them connect up with how to get back into college or into college at all. So it was a wonderful integrated system, I thought, and hopefully still is. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I really so enjoyed being part of Community Well and also being part of the network of other practitioners who were there, that it feels like we really can support each other in some community as practitioners We come together once a month for potlucks and are able to network with each other and figure out how we can also best serve the community that we're trying to serve. Yeah. I'm also on the advisory board of Community Well. So I'm also trying to be involved in growing it and seeing what we can do and how we can offer more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. The wheels are turning in my head. What can I do at Community Well? Yeah. So, this is not a pleasant subject, but I do feel like it's a very, very important one to talk about in a platform like this that I have to offer. And hopefully you have something you'd be willing to say about it. But I think, domestic violence is sort of this almost nebulous term for people in a way. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that domestic violence incidences are often at a peak during pregnancy and postpartum, right? So it's a time of life that's stressful, and it's a time of life where tendencies towards violence are likely to be augmented, by the circumstance. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about your work, past and present, and possibly future, with domestic violence.
Sure. Well, in the past, like I mentioned earlier, I was facilitating court-ordered groups for males and females who had been convicted of domestic violence, and have also worked with survivors and victims. And now my work is with individuals. So I'm not doing groups with domestic violence right now, but I am working with people on both sides, all sides. I think a lot of times people think of domestic violence as, there's one person in the relationship who is the aggressor and is the perpetrator and does this to someone else. And that is sometimes the case, and sometimes it's more complicated.
I should imagine. And almost always.
Yeah, a lot of times. So,
which I hope our listeners understand is not victim blaming.
No.
Right? This is not what we're talking about.
No.
That somebody has to be wrong. It's way more deep than that.
Yes.
And not just... It's like the old phrase, at least you have a baby, right? Like a healthy baby. That's not where we're going.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for saying that. I don't want to victim blame at all. It's just, it can be a very complicated issue. Absolutely. And more than I can say here.
Sure.
And now. Yeah. But I think you're right that pregnancy and postpartum, because there's so much stress, because there are identity changes that really can bring up a lot in relationships. And if there is someone who is the aggressor, in a heterosexual relationship, oftentimes it's the male, and that going through a shift where they're not the center of their partner's world anymore, that now there's a baby, now there's a little person, that sometimes that can trigger things and can trigger violence. I think it's also important to recognize that it's not just physical violence.
Thank you.
That there is emotional violence and mental violence and sexual violence and financial violence. There's all these different ways of that people can abuse others, unfortunately.
Yes.
And again, there's so much shame that comes when someone is being abused, and oftentimes a lot of psychological manipulations so that they don't want to share what's going on, don't tell people, think it's their fault. And so people don't talk about it.
And it can be just so confusing. Yes. How do I don't understand this myself. How do I talk about what's going on? If I can't nail it down, then maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. And I think that's so often a challenge, having had these experiences in my own life. Wait, is this what it feels like?
Right. Not even really understanding what's going on, what's happening.
Yes.
Not even being able to name this is abuse or this is violence, maybe until much later.
Or even just, I feel threatened by this behavior. Right. Whatever's going on, this is how I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I tell people when people call or when people get in touch with me or what I try to do is just be really gentle with the person who's calling, that, there isn't one way to define this, and let's figure it out together. And let's talk about what this feels like for you and what's happening, and obviously connecting people to resources and legal help if they need it.
Yeah.
And also just a safe place to feel like they can come and talk about what's happening or what has happened in the past, and to be able to sort that out. Because that's another piece, is that sometimes people have experienced something in the past and didn't really process it or deal with it, and then it's coming out later.
Yes, very much. And that just because the situation has dissipated doesn't mean you're not carrying so much of what it was. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking about this. I want to bring us around before we end to a subject that I find to be a happy subject, although I think the culture often wouldn't necessarily relate to it as a happy subject, and that's teen parenting and teenage pregnancy. As my listeners know, my daughter was born when I was 18. And so I was a young parent, and I really enjoyed being pregnant and giving birth. Postpartum was rough and challenging and difficult, but for lots of various reasons. And I also enjoyed it. So, and I'm someone who, when I hear the phrase teen pregnancy used in a paragraph that feels to me like a blanket judgment of all things, parenting before the age of 30, my hackles go. I'm a little defensive about it.
Sure.
Because I just don't think that's the reality. Like, I think that we've got a cultural reality around the subject that is unsupportive. That's how I view it from a very, selfish personal place. I was lucky to get a lot of support in many ways. But why don't you talk about your experience working around the subject?
Sure. Well, the experience that I had was part of this program where teen parents would come into schools and talk about their experiences as teen parents. And the program really was aimed at pregnancy prevention for teens. And so it was part of this, program of teaching about birth control and STDs and decision-making, and in a very well-rounded way, talking about all those experiences. So the teen parents would come in and share, how they got pregnant and what life has been like for them since getting pregnant and becoming parents. And so when they were talking in front of classes, it kind of was focused on what is hard, what is difficult about being a teen parent.
Sure.
Because that was kind of the aim of the program, was to help prevent unplanned teen pregnancies, especially when there isn't a lot of support for people. I think...
Or because, right?
Because
let's face it,
support.
You're going to do this thing, and your culture is going to withhold forms of support because of your choice to give birth at an early age.
Right. And I think my experience working with these teen parents, however, was that a lot of them, or some of them, were thriving, right? Like, that's
surprise.
Some of them actually it did make a positive impact on them to become parents at a young age, and it changed their lives for the better. So in some ways it was difficult to come into schools and talk about what's hard about it. And then we would leave the stage, and they would often talk about how much they love their kids and how things are wonderful. And it really, I think, shows that it isn't just all one thing or another. Right. And it really does come down to support. And it really does come down to what kind of family you have around you and what kind of community you have around you, and whether you have a supportive partner who's there with you. There's so many factors that determine what the experience is going to be like. Yeah. And even for people where it's really hard, sometimes it can end up being a really positive thing in the long run. But yeah, it is really difficult for a lot of people too. So
sure.
It's such a mixed bag.
Yeah. Well, and let's remember that just because you hit 35 and got your degree and got your career and got all of those things together that you were supposed to do before having kids, right? Air quotes here. Doesn't mean like it's a cakewalk.
No.
Right? So I think reality check on all this. Yeah.
It's such an individual experience.
Yeah.
And so there are people who have babies during their teen years who it's really a wonderful experience for. And there are people who have experience, having babies at 40 and are really, really struggling. You're right. It really doesn't matter the age so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And in these many years of doing this, I've worked with the span and been in the span. And yeah, I think it does very much come down to not one simple thing, but that sort of integrated complex of resource from all the various angles, within and without. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks.
And I think, one of the main messages of the program was decision making, right? And was thinking about like, how do you make this decision about whether to have sex or not? How do you make the decision about whether to be a parent or not if you do get pregnant?
Yeah.
And so it was really about trying to empower people to make those decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Maybe not have it be by default all the time.
Yeah.
If possible. Yeah. That's great. That's lovely. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's always a fun topic for me. So Leah, why don't you give our listeners your contact info and any other little tidbits that you'd like before we say goodbye?
Sure. So obviously I have my private practice at Community Well at 78 Ocean Avenue. People can reach me by phone, 415-305-1228. I'm also available by email, leahchalofsky@gmail.com. I have a website, which is leahchalofsky.com. So I'm reachable. I'm also on Psychology Today listing, on the Community Well website. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Great.
And I have an, individual practice right now, seeing clients individually, and I'm sure I will do more groups in the future because I really do enjoy leading groups.
Wonderful. Leah, thanks again for coming on the show. I'm so thrilled. This is a really fun conversation. And listeners, thanks again for showing up and hearing what we have to say. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, and I guess we do all of those Twittery things. I actually do them myself. I just don't really know what I'm doing when I do them. But so far so good. And, we'll see you next time on the Fourth Trimester Podcast. Tell everyone you know. And thanks for listening.
You can subscribe to this podcast in order to hear more from us. Thank you for listening, everyone, and I hope you'll join us next time on the Fourth Trimester. The theme music on this podcast was created by Sean Trott. Hear more at soundcloud.com/Sean Trott. Special thanks to my true loves, my husband Ben, daughter Penelope, and baby girl Evelyn. Don't forget to share the Fourth Trimester Podcast with any new and expecting parents. I'm Sarah Trott. Goodbye for now.
Hello again, bicycle man. I know you're doing all that you can. I wrote the song, simple and true. I wrote the song, I'll sing a song for you. You got your wheels, you got your gears. You ride around town without any fear. You got your pedals, you got your brakes. You always wear your helmet for safety's sake. Hello again, bicycle man. I know you're doing all that you can. I wrote the song, simple and true. I wrote the song, I sing a song for you. Hello again, bicycle man. I know you're doing the best that you can. I wrote the song, simple and true. I wrote the song, I sing a song for you.